Welcome back! So today, we're embarking on a truly epic explainer. We're going to track these grand cycles of empire that defined the ancient Hellenic world. We're talking about the very foundations of human history here. We're basically compressing thousands of years of triumphs, tragedies, and just world-altering innovations into one cohesive journey. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's establish the sheer scale of what we're looking at here. A massive 3,000-year scope. Look at the immense gap between our first marker, the emergence of the Minoans around 3000 BC, all the way to our final marker, the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. It's crucial to remember that this wasn't just one continuous empire. Instead, it's this wild series of incredible rises and really devastating falls. And that begs a really fascinating question. How exactly did this scattered collection of localized, ancient maritime cultures pass the torch of human progress forward? How did they ultimately birth the Western civilization we live in today? It's kind of wild to think about how these tiny islands and coastal plains managed to completely out-innovate the massive centralized empires of the East. Chapter 1. The First Palaces and Kings. To figure out how it all started, we have to go back over 5,000 years to the island of Crete. Now, what's really striking here is the stark contrast between the two foundational cultures of early Greece. On one hand, you've got the Minoans on Crete, super advanced, trade-focused, with a matriarchal religion. They seemed pretty peaceful. But then, rising on the mainland, you have the Mycenaeans. And these guys were a heavily militaristic aristocracy ruled by warlord kings known as the Wanaks. The Mycenaeans actually adopted a ton of their art and writing from the Minoans, but they applied it to this highly hierarchical, warrior-driven society.
But, as we're going to see over and over again, nothing lasts forever. Sudden cataclysms completely shattered this first golden age. In 1600 BC, the Thera volcano erupted, and we're talking massive tsunamis that just wiped out the Minoan fleets. The Mycenaeans, ruthlessly taking advantage of this, invaded a weakened Crete. But their victory was pretty short-lived. Even the mighty Mycenaeans eventually fell victim to widespread raids by the mysterious Sea Peoples, which was followed shortly by the Dorian invasions from the north. This total collapse plunged the whole region into a dark age that lasted for centuries.
Chapter 2. Out of the Dark Ages. Now, this period of darkness wasn't the end. Actually, it's like a forest fire making way for new growth. As populations finally recovered, they organized into something entirely revolutionary, the polis. This was an independent city-state, and it became the absolute crucial building block of Greek society. Because the mountainous terrain kept everyone so fragmented, they couldn't just form one giant kingdom. Instead, they formed these fiercely independent hubs. And it's right here that groundbreaking concepts like legal citizenship, voting, and civic duty were born, literally the bedrock of our modern democracies. Naturally, this intense independent streak bred a massive cultural clash, especially between the two dominant city-states that really define this era. Think of them as the opposing poles of the Greek mindset. You've got Athens, with its Ionian roots, pioneering democracy and pouring its energy into philosophy, art, and free speech. And then on the flip side, you have Sparta. Founded by the militaristic Dorians, Sparta was a highly disciplined oligarchy entirely obsessed with military supremacy. Yet, despite their fierce independence and the fact that their governments couldn't have been more different, these city-states genuinely viewed themselves as part of one unified Hellenic family. They were tied together by a shared alphabet, the incredible heroic epics of Homer, a common pantheon of gods, and of course the Pan-Hellenic Games, like the Olympics, which kicked off in 776 BC. This shared culture was absolutely crucial. It's the only reason they were able to unite when a massive existential threat appeared on the horizon.
Chapter 3. The Classical Golden Age.
The explosive zenith of Greek culture didn't just happen out of nowhere. It blossomed exactly when these fragmented city-states were forced to defend their homeland from total annihilation. The timeline of the Greco-Persian Wars is honestly a miraculous micro-narrative. The mighty Persian Achaemenid Empire, literally the largest empire the world had ever seen at that point, tried to subjugate Greece. But these vastly outnumbered Greek coalitions fought back, from the shock victory at Marathon to the legendary stand at Thermopylae, the brilliant naval trap at Salamis, and finally the decisive blow at Plataea. They actually repelled the empire and secured their freedom. No way they should have won, but they did. Flush with victory and a whole lot of new wealth, Athens entered a golden age, triggering this rapid-fire intellectual explosion that permanently changed human history. Think about these heavy hitters. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were busy mapping out Western philosophy. Meanwhile, Leucippus and Democritus were literally inventing early atomic theory.
Add in Herodotus basically creating the entire discipline of recorded history, and architects using the mathematical perfection of the golden ratio to build the breathtaking Parthenon. It's just staggering. But here's the crucial, tragic point. This era of incredible enlightenment was ultimately destroyed from within. Simmering tensions over Athenian dominance exploded into the Peloponnesian War. For 27 devastating years, Athens and Sparta absolutely tore the Greek world apart, fulfilling this tragic cycle of hubris and ruin. Sparta eventually dismantled the Athenian Empire, but it left the entire region socially divided, economically strained, and incredibly vulnerable.
Chapter 4: Alexander's Hellenistic Empire. That extreme vulnerability opened the door for a new power, rising far to the north, in the previously overlooked kingdom of Macedon. King Philip II revolutionized warfare there with his phalanx tactics, conquering the weakened Greeks. But it was his legendary son who would completely redraw the map. 30. That is the number you need to remember here. By the age of merely 30 years old, Alexander the Great took his father's army, marched east, utterly dismantled the Persian Empire, and pushed all the way to the borders of India. He forged the largest empire the world had ever seen, all before his unexpected death in 323 BC. But because Alexander failed to name a clear heir, the whole thing fell apart almost instantly. At the partition of Babylon, his leading generals violently divided up the spoils. This kicked off a brutal 41-year war, ultimately fracturing his massive empire into 3 successor states: the Ptolemaic kingdom down in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire sprawling across Persia and Syria, and the Antigonid dynasty holding on to Macedon and Greece.
Now, even though they were politically divided, Alexander's conquests achieved something monumental. They birthed the Hellenistic era. This era is defined by syncretism, this seamless, almost wild blending of Greek culture with local Egyptian, Persian, and Indian traditions. Suddenly you have these vast populations across the known world connected by a shared common language, the Koine Greek dialect, and that facilitated massive global trade and incredible cultural exchange. And that shared language sparked absolute leaps in science within new cosmopolitan hubs like Alexandria. Let's look at this rapid-fire innovation. Euclid essentially became the father of geometry. Aristarchus actually proposed that the Earth revolves around the sun way ahead of his time. Herophilus pioneered the study of human anatomy, and Archimedes pushed the absolute boundaries of engineering with inventions like the Archimedes screw. It was a true, unified, golden age of science.
Chapter 5: The Fall to Rome.
As we know by now, the cycle of empire always demands a fall. While the Hellenistic kingdoms exhausted themselves fighting these endless petty wars over territory, a new power was steadily, inexorably rising from the banks of the Tiber River, the Roman Republic. So what happens when the culturally rich, highly intellectual Hellenistic states collide with the brutally efficient, unstoppable military machine of the Roman legions? Well, history answers that question with brutal efficiency. Rome systematically dismantled Alexander's successor kingdoms one by one. At the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, the famed Macedonian phalanx was totally outmaneuvered and destroyed. By 63 BC, the decaying Seleucid Empire was annexed. And finally, in 31 BC, following the disastrous naval defeat at Actium, Queen Cleopatra and Mark Antony took their own lives. That delivered Egypt directly into Roman hands. To really grasp the harsh reality of this Roman conquest, we just have to look at the year 146 BC. When the Greek city-states tried to rebel against Roman taxation, the Senate didn't just defeat them. They sent an army to Corinth, slaughtered the men, enslaved the women and children, and burned the fabled city straight to the ground. It was an absolutely unmistakable rebel and die warning, and it effectively ended Greek political independence forever. However, in a really fascinating twist of fate, the conquered ultimately conquered their conquerors. Rome hungrily absorbed Greek culture. Roman cities started sporting beautiful Doric and Ionic columns. The Roman elite proudly became bilingual, speaking both Latin and Greek. Greek Stoicism became the defining virtue of the Roman statesmen. Even their entire religious pantheon fused, with Greek deities merging into Roman ones, Zeus transforming into Jupiter. Which leaves us with this profound final thought. The Greek cycles of political empire might have been violently extinguished by Rome, sure. But their ideas, their democracy, their philosophy, their art, and their science, they became immortal. Through this incredible blending of traditions, Greco-Roman culture conquered the world, paving the way for what we know today as Western civilization. So it leaves us with a provocative question. Did Rome truly conquer Greece,
Or did the ideas of ancient Greece secretly conquer the rest of the modern world? It's a massive thought, and definitely something worth pondering long after this explainer ends. Thanks for joining me on this one.